WCRF, Brian and Jannelle, and we've got Jamie Buxton in for Jannelle today. Joining us live is our friend and regular contributor. He's an assistant professor of digital media at Cedarville University, Professor Sean O'Connor. Welcome back.
Thank you so much. Good morning, Jamie. Good to meet you.
Thank you.
So in terms of like helping our children and grandchildren visualize their future, I could picture some parents and grandparents kind of going, wait, you want to go into media? Mm-hmm. You want to major in film? Is that what Christians should be doing? How do you respond to suspicions like that and concerns?
Sure. I think there are several reasons why I think it's good to have conversations about this. Because for one thing, we could talk all day about just the secular worldview that may be, impacted or contributing to somebody's well-being. But also, I think it's worth noting that, I know a lot of friends and colleagues I've worked with on films and things before. The idea of film school or going to college for something like that, it's it's a waste of time. It's 4 years and a lot of money, and I'd rather spend the money that I would be spending on college making a film. You know what I mean? And there have been a lot of people that have done that really well. I first off would say I think the reason why I think it's important to do a program like what I'm able to teach at Cedarville, and I'm very grateful for it, is it allows collaboration and relationships with people and figuring out how to do that in a smaller space like a classroom that I think is a good training grounds for the future, years from then when students are able to get jobs. But I would say I think probably a big contributing factor for a lot of maybe parents listening or Christian families is you studying film going to affect your relationship with Jesus in a negative light? And I can certainly see, that's happened. I've unfortunately seen that happen, but I also know that, as we've talked about on the show before, there's a huge importance for time in the Word and accountability and things like that keep you on the path following the Lord. And I'm really thankful that schools like Cedarville and other Christian universities that we can talk about do that very well.
Well, I've seen a constant debate among Christian writers and intellectuals about where's the greatest place for Christians to make an impact on culture. Mm-hmm. Is it through politics or is it through media and culture and in that sense? So what's your take on that? I can guess the answer, but I'm curious to know your thoughts.
Sure. I think those two areas nowadays very much overlap. And, they in some ways serve, one serves the other and vice versa. I personally, I think the reason why I went into a field, the media production field specifically, is because there's an element of storytelling there and an element of character and narrative and those kinds of things that really was attractive to me. And even when you're making documentary films or corporate video, nonprofit commercials and promo videos like I've done in the past, there's an element of story that is, I think, familiar to many of us based on how Jesus told stories and parables and how you find that in Scripture, but can also be, allegorical to the way that we follow Jesus and love others despite, sin in their lives and things like that. So that's why I'm glad I'm able to serve in that field and encourage students to do the same.
How would you rate how the church is doing in terms of our ability to create quality, engaging films?
Well, that's
Sorry.
a conversation we can go into a lot of detail as well. But, it's something that, 10 years ago, I would have said, oh, yeah, we could be doing a lot better. And I think we can always do better. I think we as Christian filmmakers have very much a tendency, especially I would say Protestant filmmakers, to emphasize the word over the image. And in a visual medium like film or television, visual storytelling is key. And we're not always very good at that. And I think that's something we can always work on. But I also you hear stories of films like War Room and Overcomer, the films that those churches have made over the years, and how those films are just bathed in prayer, and their plot points and story elements come from scripture as well as personal testimonies of people who made them. And it's like, well, they could probably stand before God one day and he will say, well done, good and faithful servant. And isn't that what we want? Despite, maybe a film that isn't maybe as, I don't know, I hate to use the word effective. It's not a great word to use, but you know what I mean? It's like I think we need to be asking ourselves, and I encourage my students to ask this, who are we glorifying and serving with the films we make, the videos we make, the stories we tell? That's an important thing to consider.
And yet I'll be the guy that says, I think that cinematography and script and lighting and all those things really matter, and acting. Yeah. And so we can tell a better story when we don't necessarily just employ volunteers, but we find the best cinematography and the best writing. Fair?
Right. Absolutely. Unfortunately, all those things cost money, which not all of us have. And that's something that, we talk about in class, and we figure out, okay, how do we tell stories that mean something and have something to say and are done well on a production level with few resources? Because my argument is, and I'll talk about this next Thursday when I start this film production class I teach at Cedarville, is that if we look at what Jesus says in Luke 16, if we can be trusted with little, we can be trusted with much. I think it's important that we start the training grounds with, smaller scale things and work our way up. That's important.
Well, and then from my vantage point, think of what we could do in terms of cultural influence if even a fraction of the money that we pour into politics was poured into the arts. Sure. I think we can make a huge difference.
Absolutely.
So I've got a question for you. And I'm a product of a wonderful Christian undergraduate program, but, I've got a son at home. He's 9, and he wants to be a YouTuber, and he could be rich tomorrow. I mean, because he's like his mama, right? On YouTube, he could be rich tomorrow. How do you encourage students to come get a degree when they can jump on and start doing things, from home and much younger?
That's a great point, and that's something that, I wonder, I'm not having that conversation at Cedarville as much as I would expect to, and I guess that's because, students are having decided, they want to, come study at this university. But you're right. I mean, we live in an age in the last, 20, 30 years, especially, where, you can make an independent film or YouTube or video or whatever. And, it can go viral, and that starts your filmmaking career, essentially. The amount of times that actually happens is very small, unfortunately. And so I think it's important to keep, expectations in check. But, a big reason why I would say an undergraduate level, and maybe film school at the graduate level, that's important, is because if you're creating video content in a bubble, which if I were a YouTuber, that's probably what I would be doing. I would be making it, mostly by myself. You learn fewer lessons that way. And I think it's important to, work with others and get others' feedback, and even, students at Cedarville, not only making films together, but as they're editing something, having another student come over and say, hey, can you take a look at this and let me know what you think, and where, what can I be changing? I think that's having collaboration and accountability and those things. That's a huge aspect of filmmaking and video production, and also just cultivating relationships in a way that honors the Lord. I think that's important. So I would say, if that's what the Lord lays on your heart to do, all for it. But I think it's also important to find opportunities to connect with people who are writing or producing video or editing or doing things like you are, to encourage you and maybe even correct and help point you in the right direction.
So I have 3 kids in high school this year, and so I'm thinking more and more about careers and such. And what I'm finding is it's hard for my wife and I to think outside of the box in which we have lived. And film production would not be something I would think about for my children. So what are those attributes or skills or interests that I would have to look for to know if film production would be something to think about for my kids?
Sure. I mean, it's a very detail-oriented field, I think, and some great film directors and some well-respected, but also kind of cruel film directors. If you go through film history, like they're very intentional about what's in the shot and how the camera's moving and lighting, like you were talking about, and things like that. And I think there are plenty of opportunities, even in church ministries. I served on the tech team at my church when I was growing up and things like that to give me kind of some training that I needed for lighting and sound and things like that. But I also think, again, it goes back to, storytelling and narrative and character and, meaning. That's a huge aspect. We have to have something to say with films that we make and scripts we write and things like that. And I think, a lot of people say, if you want to be a screenwriter, just start writing and, learn your lessons and keep doing it. And again, keep asking questions from other people, like, how does this read to you? What do you think? And just getting feedback from people you trust who can be honest with you about whether or not something's good. I think that's important. So I don't know if your kids are interested in, some of those things, just idea generation and working with others, but that's great training ground.
So even just identifying a kid who's a strong writer or storyteller, rather than saying, oh, go to journalism or journalism school or be an English teacher, film school would be something to consider. Sure.
Yeah. One story I think of off the top of my head is the guy who directed Black Panther for Marvel. His history is he was an athlete in school who was not even really thinking. I think he was maybe trying to go into business or law school or something. And then he wrote a paper for an English class, and his teacher said, the way you write, you could be a really good screenwriter. And so he started looking into it. And then, within 10, 20 years, he's, making Creed and Black Panther and all those things. So it can start from anywhere. And I think it's important to really pray through, no matter where you are, how can I have meaningful conversations to, plant those seeds that, point people towards careers that honor the Lord.
Well, again, our friend Professor Sean O'Connor is an assistant professor of digital media at Cedarville University. And if your kid is considering film school and such, consider Cedarville University. What other what media degrees do you offer for those who are curious?
Sure. So we have a major called Broadcasting, Digital Media, and Journalism. It's part of our communication department. That major has a few emphases, such as digital film and video, digital audio. We have a journalism emphasis. There's also a way for students to do what's called integrated digital media, so it sort of combine multiple interests. But I've been in at this school. This is my fourth year teaching, and I'm really looking forward to jumping back into classes next week and seeking the Lord with those students. And I appreciate your prayers as we do that.
You bet. Again, cedarville.edu is the website, cedarville.edu. Thanks, Professor O'Connor. Hope your school year gets off to a great start, my friend.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.